Welcome to the Long Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Chacha Bankard, and I'm here with two monsters. First, his war isn't yet over. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
The next battle is not one waged to the death, but a battle to live for the future. I'm doing well, Jen. How are you?
I'm great, especially now that you've established instant gravitas for the show. And he landed that bucket of bolts on this Swiss cheese of a runway. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
This brings in money. With money, we can even buy American powdered milk. I'm good, Jen, and maybe feel bad about picking a quote related to a baby's survival for my opening quote.
Oh, that's all right. We're pro babies being fed on this podcast. So those dear listeners were right.
Whoa,
Controversial takes.
We didn't sign off on that.
So, listeners, if you're confused, those were all references to the film we are here to review today, Godzilla Minus One. It is now on Netflix and actually arrived on the streaming service fairly unannounced. I remember being super excited when I saw that it was dropping, because I feel like the first round of news was like it's coming to, I assumed, VOD only. I'm like, great, I'm gonna be able to finally watch this movie. And then it was like, wait, it's on Netflix. What? So they really did sort of a sneak attack on that one, which I think was great. If you are listening to us for the first time, we will have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen Godzilla Minus One. And then with a very clear spoiler alert, an emergency siren, if you will, we will shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. I mean, but to be fair, the Godzilla Minus One, it's on Netflix right now. You can just watch it. PT, if listeners think we're podcasters plus one after listening to this episode, what can they do?
Sorry. I love you were like, please change this, and then no one did. I'm sorry. If listeners believe that our rickety boat is worth getting on, they can follow the Long Take Review wherever they get their podcasts. We host the feed on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, wherever you get good podcast content. You can also follow us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review and on Letterboxd at LTR Pod.
Thanks, PT. So let's start with our short takes. What did everybody think about Godzilla Minus One? And then feel free to, if you want to give some context for, did you see this the first time around? Did you see it on Netflix? Because that might change, give some different context to our takes.
So I saw this in the theater when it came out. And one of the things, I think I've talked about this on air before, but maybe listeners weren't listening to that episode. I try to keep up with as much as I can with the most popular on Letterboxd, which means I see a lot of really dumb movies. Basically, as soon as a streaming movie premieres, I have to watch that if I want to keep up with this project. I'm looking at you, Jennifer Lopez starring vehicle Atlas. And so I hadn't heard there was a Godzilla movie coming out, and then it appeared on the most popular list on Letterboxd, and I was like, oh, I didn't realize this. It kind of arrived in theaters last December, I believe, without much fanfare, at least on my parts of the internet. But I had a Monday night free, and I went to go check it out, and I was blown away. So my initial take is I'm not a big Godzilla fan. I think a real Godzilla fan would tell me I've only seen the lesser ones. I've seen the Matthew Broderick one from 98-ish that was like, hey, you like Jurassic Park? Come see this Godzilla movie. And I'll bring Hank Azaria with me. And then, right, I think he's in that. I saw the Gareth Edwards one and then have largely kept up with the modern American iterations due to this same silly Letterboxd project. So I don't have a deep context with Godzilla, but I was like, oh my God, this movie is so good. And it is just like the kind of movie you're like afraid that you'll have to go to the bathroom during. You're like, I got to see all of this and understand all of this. So hugely enthusiastic, was over the moon when it snuck into both the LTR awards and into the Oscars, I believe, with a single nomination, just to get something done. So I am so excited, mostly because I think PT and I have harassed Jen unceasingly about having missed it, that it's out here, and I'm so excited the internet is, talking about it constantly, and all my nerd friends are like, oh my God, this movie's out and it's really good. So PT, I know I just slightly spoiled your reaction, but what did you think about it?
No, I mean, the very short take is I'm with you. It's vindication. It's that there's the people who saw this movie back in December and were like, this movie is amazing and it's incredible, but it wasn't as widely seen. I mean, I think it was successful for the size of movie it was, especially a foreign movie, opening with very little fanfare. And as we will discuss, sort of in an interesting marketing pocket within the movie landscape. And obviously was successful enough that it got an Oscar nomination and then got an Oscar win. So it had that kind of talk and momentum. But yeah, the wider conversation, the wider discourse didn't get a chance to really sink into it until these last couple weeks. And it's just been like, welcome to the party, everybody. We're glad you can be here. I am probably more of a Godzilla person than the two of you, and also more than Antonio, who can't be here. But this was the first Godzilla movie he saw, and he had a positive reaction to short take him in absentia. But I'm not, for real heads. I would be like, you don't really know. Like, I've seen the original from the 50s, and I have seen many of the quickly and increasingly goofy follow-ups that, there's 15 or 16 of them over the sort of Showa era, for those movies, when you bring in Mothra, and you bring in Ghidorah, and all these other monsters show up, and Godzilla has a kid at one point. There's like baby Godzilla. It gets wacky. But I do conceptually really like the character, the potential for the metaphor. I enjoy some of the lesser thought of American Godzilla movies from the MonsterVerse. So like I can put aside a lot to just be like, oh, but there's like 15 minutes where just Godzilla busts up a city, and that's great. But this is like a legitimately great movie that happens to have Godzilla in it. So that's my short take is divided into two. If you're someone who is interested in Godzilla movies, I will say this is a Godzilla movie where you care as much about the humans as you do about the monster, which is very rare. I think only that first movie from 54 is the only other one I can say that's actually true about. And if you are someone who's like, I don't watch that, and that's trash. I don't really do that. This is a legitimately great post-war Japan rumination on guilt and the sort of the pressures of war, and the way that choices by leadership in a state can be grinding down the people who live there, that happens to have a giant lizard that shows up every like 15 minutes and do something super cool. So if that in any way, if either of those sound intriguing, you should definitely check out this movie because it's excellent. Jen, how about you?
So, as it's already been established, I was the embarrassment to the podcast for sleeping on this movie, and I remember everyone telling me to go see it, including you two, and I remember wanting to go see it, and it just couldn't make it happen. It was, I think it was partly the time of year, right? We were in really deep in Oscars season and coverage, and I had to kind of, as I do every year, make tough choices to be like, well, is this going to get a lot of Oscar stuff? So maybe I need to put it deprioritize it a little bit, even though I really wanted to see it. And I really regretted it because there was a long dead period where I was like, I have no idea when this movie's coming to VOD. Like, when am I going to be able to see this movie? Because there was the other Godzilla movie, right? And that's conflicting the rights and stuff like that. They had to wait until that one did its run in theaters. And I was just like, I'm never going to be able to see this movie. So it was like extra delight to have it show up when it did. I thought we were going to have to wait till the end of the summer. At least I was really surprised it was this early. But yeah, so I was coming at it from a slightly different perspective because it'd been really, really hyped up, not just by YouTube, but by everyone. By the time I saw it for the first time on Netflix, like last week or whenever it came out. So I was in a tougher position. I was kind of worried. I'm like, is this going to live up to the hype? And I 100% it does. It's so good. um, and for all the reasons that both of you have just said, but for me, I was not expecting it. Like, I kind of knew it was taking place in the sort of World War II era, because I had heard people compare it to like an interesting double feature with Oppenheimer, right? So like I knew there was a historical factor, but I didn't realize how much the story was really addressing post-war issues, and like how it was like built all around that. And so that was the thing that really took me by surprise, and that the story and the writing is so good. And like I feel bad saying this, but like much better than it has any business being, considering it's a Godzilla movie. Like that was sort of my reaction, where I was like, wow, I can't believe that they didn't have to put all this effort into not just the effects, obviously, but like that I would have been not have been surprised by, but that the idea that the story was so good, it didn't, and I feel like it didn't really need to be. Like people will still go see Godzilla movies even if it's not a good story, right? So that's really the astounding thing to me, and how much I cared about the main character. So yeah, I co-sign. This movie's great. Everyone should see it. I guess we've already kind of moved into the recommendation algorithm, so we'll go ahead and make that official. So the recommendation algorithm, we acknowledge that not every film is for everyone, so we're trying to establish the audience of this film. It sounds like we're on the everyone can go see this. You don't have to really have any attachment to Godzilla.
I think so. And I did realize as I was giving my short takes, I was like, oh, this is the recommendation algorithm content. I should have arranged my thoughts better on it. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's certainly like 3-quadrant of like, if you want a monster movie, if you want a serious sort of socio-political movie, and also if you want like interpersonal drama of people sort of literally found family, as a story thread. That's I think that covers a lot of ground. That covers a lot of people who can do this. And the one thing I will say, which I hope is not a barrier, is I would strongly recommend people watch this in Japanese with the subtitles, because it's almost everyone who's listening who hasn't seen it will probably go watch it on Netflix, or even if you buy it, I feel like it might default to the English dub, which we only watched in this house. We only watched it for a line and a half, and I was like, no, we're not doing that. Like that's unacceptable to miss the performances of these actors. But yeah, hopefully the recommendation for subtitles wouldn't be something that would stop people from watching this. Or again, having only watched a line and a half, I don't know how good the dub is, but hopefully whatever that quality is not going to hinder people's enjoyment of it. But yeah, I think it can be anyone. Greg, what do you think?
Yeah, I really wish I knew word for word what Bong Joon-ho said, right? If you can get over the barrier of the 1/4 inch at the bottom of your screen, a world of cinema opens up. So co-sign the recommendation there. I noted in the iTunes store, they are also separately selling Godzilla -1 minus color. So that might be when I make my purchase, what I go for to try out the black and white version. Which I actually do think we talked about on air, that PT and I were both like, oh, maybe we can get back. And I wasn't able to see that version. So, so I think you covered it right. I guess I want to describe myself a little bit in saying that, like, I had always written these movies off as kind of silly and dumb. And I knew there was an underlying metaphor related to the atomic bomb and kind of the monstrous nature of that event that Japan has had to deal with over time. And so I think if you, like me, thought like I am interested in how Japan would talk about World War II, this is like a fascinating way into it. Actually, I'm having podcast flashbacks. I think I even said when we were talking about it that like, oh, I've never seen a Japanese creator really grapple with the war. And PT said, just wait, Miyazaki next week. Like let's do this. So I do think like, we had these two movies that essentially came out at the same moment that did play with that and kind of open it up. So if I don't know if that's a fourth quadrant, it's not the fourth quadrant, but if you are somebody who's like, oh, I'm actually kind of interested in history and puzzling out this much more than these previous efforts have made, I'd also lump into that. Japanese culture gets appropriated so often by so many bad actors. A lot of people who love anime are, wonderful people who respect Japanese culture. But a lot of people are like, let's just make it Americanized, or let's just rip off the best pieces of this and put it in American culture. And so I found this totally refreshing to be like, this is the culture that birthed it, telling a story about their people, their country, and it just happens to have a giant effing lizard in it knocking buildings down, which is awesome. So, Jen, before I accidentally guess the explicit tag, I did say effing, so we're safe. But what do you think?
For now.
So the main reference point that I would put forth for people to be like, if you like this, you'll like Godzilla Minus One, I would say is like a movie like Dunkirk. Not to pick like another Christopher Nolan movie other than Oppenheimer, but something where like it's high drama, epic war story, right? I would even probably say like something like All Quiet on the Western Front, or just pick your favorite World War II movies, right? There is something I feel like a little bit of a throwback in this as well. So I would say even if you really like, I'm not thinking of a good specific example right now, but like if you like old timey war movies, like from the 50s and 60s, I feel like it also has the type of storytelling has a little bit of strain in that. And I think that's purposeful because I think even in the design of Godzilla, it does seem to be a throwback to the original, right? Like I think it's purposely trying to kind of take us back to where Godzilla started as opposed to where Godzilla is now, especially with the American versions of the franchise.
Well, I think that what you're sort of hitting on there is it's a really interesting, and I think this is part of what elevates it, component of it isn't like, look at these heroes of the war and look at all the sacrifices they had to make, which is what a lot of World War II movies made in America since like the 90s, probably, maybe even the 80s have been. So when you go back to those movies from the late 40s, like 50s and 60s, it was a lot more of like, that was awful. Like that was really bad. And maybe we had to do that. Maybe that was, in the American story, it's like, maybe we had to do that, but like, oh my God, like that was devastating. And that element isn't as present. We get maybe in Vietnam movies, we get those, but not as much in World War II movies. And I do think there's something interesting to it being the Japanese perspective when I have family that's both of Chinese and also Indonesian descent. So the ingrained familial wisdom for me is that the Japanese were the bad guys, and not just because they attacked America, but because they were very aggressive in that region. And so there's a lot of guilt in there, and a lot of sort of what were our leaders doing, and then what were we doing that's baked in, which again maybe makes it more of a Vietnam parallel for the American storytelling. But yeah, I think because it has all those ingredients mixed in a post-World War II story, it's very different, and it's very, I think, sort of refreshing. The other touchstone I'll add, which is what got Jasmine to actually be very interested in it, is that it's a lot like Jaws. Like it has the rickety boat, it has the team that gets together, that sort of hatches a plan with like the gruff fisherman, the science guy, our hero who's like reluctantly involved in this, searching for and trying to fight and stop a big creature of the sea. So there's certainly like huge segments here that also tap into that.
They really do need a bigger boat. It's apparent.
remember in award season, Spielberg at some lunch ran up to them, the directors of this movie, and said, "I watched your movie twice," and they reportedly died on the spot, knowing that he loved it so much he immediately watched it again, and because they admit that he's a huge influence on this, so it's a good recommendation as well.
All right, I think we're ready for spoiler mode. So if you have not seen Godzilla Minus One, as we've already said, it's great. You should go check it out. Even if you are like, I have never seen a Godzilla movie, there's still a lot for you there. Come rejoin us for the rest of the conversation once you've seen it. So we already mentioned this briefly, but I kind of want to dig into it a little deeper. But I think one of the most powerful things for me was sort of what Greg was talking about earlier of like Godzilla as this, and I couldn't come up with the right literary term, but I was like, he's not an allegory, he's not even a metaphor, but he's just like this like place to put all of your anxiety and like, you know what I mean? Like he's the product of big feelings and anxiety and trauma and like about the atomic bomb and the radiation and like just the fallout from World War II. How specifically do we feel like the movie is achieving that? You know what I mean? Like what can we point to in the movie? Because I think we're all going to agree on that first part, but like what's the how?
I think the key is that it's not over the credits in this movie. I believe that's the Gareth Edwards Godzilla, which I have unfortunately watched since I watched this one. But they do reference there are montages that show that the atomic bomb testing continues and that this is having an impact in pushing Godzilla. So there's certainly that kind of literal connection to the fallout, Jen, and I saw that pun. But then the connection to the political fallout as well, because I thought what really interested me so much is a major theme in this film came out that it was the government versus normal people, that the government made the decisions and forced the normal people to go fight for them. And now they aren't taking care of the normal people anymore. And so in that way, it felt to me like how I understand noir from the American 1950s, right? Where, yes, we're talking about highways in LA, but we're really talking about the fact that we all have a lot of psychological damage we're dealing with. And so the way they made sure that all of these characters are kind of carrying that burden, and I can't necessarily answer your question because then it's like Godzilla comes in, it's like all of that drops, and yet somehow it doesn't, because it's like, no, this is the part of it, and this is what ends up uniting them. So it's like it almost feels like it's a separate drama, except it just is totally woven into the fact that like, well, she only has that job downtown because they need money because the government won't buy them a new house and they're living in this rubble and so on and so forth. So so the real monster is just the man, as in capital T, capital M. And that's where we are. PT, answer the question better than I did.
Well, I mean, in a way, I think what I was going to say is sort of that it's the man, but it's just like Godzilla's the uncontrollable forces that are influencing us at all times, sort of battering us around. Is that the government? Is that, war? Is that in the environment? Is that, just, random happenstance that can crop up? But it's, in a way, it's interesting because it is sort of, well, these are the consequences of our actions, because it's, subtle, but I think it is set up that Godzilla only first emerges at the beginning of the movie on the island where our main character lands after abandoning his kamikaze mission. All the conversation with the mechanics are like, well, the war's already over. So I think it's supposed to be after Hiroshima. So it is still, Godzilla has woken up because of an atomic blast. And then the testing that happens later, it just makes him stronger, gives him this nuclear energy. So, there is this kind of, we've meddled in things that we shouldn't have meddled with. You have meddled in the primal forces of nature, Mr. Beale, and now you will atone. But Mr. Beale is all of Japan. And atoning just means you're going to get crushed and blown up. But yeah, it's that, like, people are just trying to live and people are just trying to get by and work through things. And then suddenly these huge forces happen that are out of their control, and they have to, like, choose, are they just going to accept it? Are you going to throw your life away to either, stop it or to try to hide from it? Or are you going to try to choose to live, which I think is the sort of big underlying thing. And that sort of concept is what ties the seemingly disparate things together. There is a worse version of this movie that is like, we made a really good drama about people, and then there's just randomly cut to Godzilla every once in a while. But there is some reason why it feels like Godzilla is relevant. Godzilla matters. Godzilla is a part of the story. It isn't just like a deus ex machina that shows up every once in a while and stomps, but that it makes sense that it's there. And I think it's that, just that, people rattling around trying to deal with the stuff that's all above their heads. But, can people band together and actually do something positive to be able to live in it? I don't know. Jen, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. And I think part of it is they don't make a huge deal out of the explanation, right? Which would have irritated me if there was a ton of exposition being like, well, because of the atomic bomb, now Godzilla is huge, right? Like, but they do put it in there, like there are references, characters do talk about, oh, I guess it's gotten, and like the visual effects also support that, because I feel like Godzilla looks different, not just in size, but in terms, it's clear visually that he has evolved for the worse, right? When we see him towards the end of the movie versus the first opening scene where he hasn't quite absorbed all the radiation yet, right? The other thing too, I would say the image of the dead fish floating, I think does so much, because it's like, yes, I know it's supposed to be like, oh no, that means Godzilla's coming, right? But just the idea that like the visual of a bunch of dead fish floating at the top of the water just seems like such a perversion of nature that I feel like that does a lot of work in terms of being like, oh yeah, this is Fallout, right? The other thing too, to go back to what Greg was saying, is that I feel like it's there's a point, maybe one or two points in the screenplay where they very specifically call out the government for how they're choosing to handle Godzilla, right? Where they're like, and I think it's the main character's like, well, we need to tell everybody, right? Everyone needs to know that Godzilla's coming. And then it's like, oh wait, the government is choosing the opposite approach of like not wanting to cause panic. And I feel like that in of itself is a metaphor for the war, right? Because I'm assuming that the idea that like, oh, we're just going to pretend like nothing's wrong, right? It was like, that's the impression I get, because it mirrors the sort of like, oh, everyone's left to fend for themselves after the war. We're just going to kind of try to pretend like it didn't happen, sort of like, and there people are like, but our reality is like everything's in shambles and we don't have any jobs or money or anything like that. So yeah, that's all just to say that I feel like there are a lot of details in the film that sort of, in the writing particularly, that sort of tie everything together and kind of bridges the sort of Godzilla story with the war story in really nice ways. But while also still being pretty pro-military, right? Because it's all those former Navy officers who have to band together. Like the government has left them behind. This is a very pro-veteran story, I guess. Like the government has left them behind, but they have to take matters into their own hands. They're the ones who are like coming up with their own plan, not sanctioned by the government, right? They're not acting as military officers. They're just citizens who used to be military officers. So I think that does a lot as well.
I did really appreciate when they have someone is like, why are we being asked to sacrifice again? Like, we sacrificed during the war. We were the soldiers. We were the sailors in the Navy. Like, what's this about? And they're like, look, we're all here. We're all here on our own. Anyone can leave. And there's like 10 people that are like, sweet, bye. Yeah. Like, I love that. Like, it wasn't like, but they're all like heroes who are going to sacrifice themselves. Some people are like, no, this is crazy. I'm going back to my family. Like, that's good. Like, and then it's not like those people are cowards or those people are, weak or anything. It's like, that's a completely valid approach. And I think that that underscored that this is individual people making choices to work together, and not some entity, some institution that exists that was pulling them together. Greg, you were going to say.
I'm glad I let you go first, because my point is so much stupider than yours. I just wanted to point out, because one of the things I walked away from this movie thinking, in only in a minorly related way, is like the last 20 minutes are like completely stupid, and yet I did not care one iota about how stupid it was, right? Like, and what I mean specifically is the like pseudoscience of how they're going to get him to go up and down very quickly, and that will freeze him in a. It's like it. It's so dumb, and right now we are in the moment of Star Wars fandom having a knockdown brawl about some flames in space, and so I'm like, to me, it's like such a good juxtaposition, because like, if you just go on the ride of the story, you have such a better time. And that's where I was at the end of this movie. The movie had earned me being like, well, this is dumb, but in true George Lucas fashion, they're telling me exactly what they're going to do, and I just need to see whether they do that thing or not. And that totally works in the movie. And I think it's a really good lesson for these. There are two IP lessons that I would link up into this conversation so far. The first is like, actually try to do something thoughtful with your IP, right? Like you were saying, they didn't just stuff Godzilla into another movie, but they were like, let's tell an important historical political message about this time period that could be relevant to the modern day in the middle of a Godzilla movie, and weave Godzilla into that, which I think a lot of the American Godzilla and Kong movies are just like coming up with this increasingly convoluted mythology that somehow just always ends up with the monkey punching the lizard in a big city. And it's like, why make this increasingly stupid to just do that? And the second lesson is just like, if you make the characters good, if you get people invested in your first two acts, then you can do whatever you want in the third act. It may just be a giant CG whatever, but people will stick around because they care about these characters and care about it, how it works out.
You're totally right, because I feel like when the main character is in that plane, and we kind of know that he's planning to sacrifice himself, right? We've been building towards that moment where he's finally like fulfilling his kamikaze mission, sort of, but on his own terms. And I think agency is also a huge thing, where it's like because the whole time he's wrestling with the guilt of like, oh, I was supposed to sacrifice myself, but I didn't, and like that's coded as cowardice. But by the end of the movie, he sort of reclaims it as like, no, like if I'm going to sacrifice myself heroically, I don't want it to be something I'm ordered to do. I want it to be something that like I feel like I want to do for my friends and the people I care about. And that only has any sort of impact because the movie has done the work earlier, as you're saying, to establish his relationship with the other men on the boat, right? To establish his relationship with this new family that he's formed, right? And like, if they don't do all that, then you're right. Like the ending scene doesn't really have any emotional weight. It's just sort of like bang, bang, like, sink float, right? Like it's like it's just it's more just about the effects, which are great and look great throughout this whole movie.
Academy Award winning effects.
Yeah, no, it's this is gonna sound really terrible, but like my biggest regret not having seen this in the theaters is because I'm like, oh, I would have predicted the visual effects win. I had talked myself out of it because I was like, oh, everyone's just like hoping that this is happening. It's just a passion thing. But if I had actually seen the movie and had seen how good it looks and how Godzilla looks like a real sentient character. And I don't mean that, like, what's interesting is like, he's not a character he's not anthropomorphized like he is like in, is it Jurassic World, where they're like, there's a Rick and Morty episode that spoofs it where they're like, yeah, that other dinosaur was kind of nice. I guess he was a nice guy, right? Like, I don't know if anyone's seen that, but like the random like acts of kindness from another creature, right? Which doesn't make any sense. So I'm not saying he's like a character in that sense, but just like the design and the effects really you do see him as a living creature that is doing his own thing, right? Like, and like, it's very, very believable visually. Yeah, just anytime he like pops out of the water and is like kind of swerving around. I'm
I
like,
loved
yes,
his
like
swimming
he's coming.
animation.
He's
It's so
coming for
good.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Apparently, and this made sense to me, modeled after the director slash visual effects coordinator's cat, like that sort of
Oh, that's
that like
perfect.
hunting and lurking.
Mm.
Watching it this time, having remembered that pull quote, is like, oh yeah, of course, that is exactly like it has house cat vibes of just Godzilla being like, I'm doing this stuff, but also kind of existing in his own world and not really thinking about what the impact it could have on anybody else.
Right. Yeah.
To go back to Greg, what you were saying about the end being very dumb, which is right, but that doesn't matter. That's another great Jaws parallel where Spielberg famously, in talking about it, he's like, the ending of Jaws doesn't make any sense. Spoilers for Jaws. People should go pause and go watch Jaws if you haven't seen it. But it's like if like the shark is jumping onto the boat at this point, and like you put the oxygen tank in his mouth, and you got to shoot the oxygen tank. He's like, this doesn't make any sense. This is very dumb. But at this point, if they're not bought in, it doesn't really matter what I do because they're out. Like if they're out, they're out. But if they're in, they're going to buy it. They're going to be like, that's fine because I will have brought them in at this point. I think it's very similar where it's like, okay, we sinky and then floaty, and that's going to work. And it's great that it doesn't. Like that's why it's good. I feel like if that had just been successful, that would have been disappointing. But of course, it's like, nope, that didn't work. And then with our main character, the thing that I really liked about it is it was there's other stories which I don't want to reference anything because that is then giving away that something like this happens in it. But where like I spend a bunch of time watching it in the back of my head being like, I don't want them to cop out and not commit to this. I don't want them, if this character's arc is I have to get to the point where I kill myself, but I have to do it on my own terms. I need that to happen. I don't want him to be saved at the end. And then like we get to that point where it's like he did it, and then it's like that extra little beat, and it's like, no, but actually he's gonna be all right. And then I'm like, you did it. You sold me on the fact that I want you. You knew that I really wanted him to live. So that was great, and that worked out so well. And you're so invested in that and how that's unfolding and how that's developing that it doesn't matter that like this is like of all the great minds that got together, it was we sink it and then we bring it back up, we give it the bends, and that'll work. This prehistoric creature that like lives in the ocean won't be able to handle that. That was the best plan that they had. It's great. It's executed so well.
Also, a really.
I just want to stay on brand and say it should be Antonio Banderas' voice right now saying it's not the bends, it's the bounce from Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
I really didn't expect that one. You did it. So I do feel like it's a really good anti-Oppenheimer moment. The Benz theory, right? Like, because I feel like there's a lot of the same, it's shot in a lot of the same way as the like we're building the bomb parts of Oppenheimer. But what's really nice is that you know that they're doing it for totally different reasons, right? They're doing it to curb destruction and chaos as opposed to create more. And so I feel like that was really having the sort of scientist guy who's on the boat with him. And then he's like, well, actually, I'm this really important scientist. Which I don't know why no one believed him when he said that before. You know what I mean? Like, because he does say like, I helped develop bombs, right? And so he really is kind of like the Japanese Oppenheimer, and but channels his guilt in a much more productive way, I feel like.
Well, I think that we've referenced it now sort of sideways a couple of times, but that was one of the discourse things when this movie came out was, oh, this pairs really well with Oppenheimer. And maybe that's just because it was like, ooh, World War II, nuclear bombs, like shiny objects from the movie year 2023. But I do think there is the thing that folks critiqued Oppenheimer for not having was the impact of his work on the people of Japan. And that's what this movie is. So there is something interesting about pairing these two together. I wouldn't necessarily be like, everyone should go and watch them back to back, because I think that's like 5.5
It would be a
hours
lot.
of time.
Mm.
Well, it would be like 5 hours, but still, it's a lot of time. But they are in interesting conversation with each other for like the very prestige-y, but still, you know, I mean, Nolan has you eating your popcorn. Like you're just sort of like, yep, I'm having a good time for this 3-hour biopic of a scientist sitting in a, you know, committee room. It's still a very interesting movie, and this is you know, sort of taking things in I don't know. I kind of lost track of my point, but basically it's like Nolan makes a sort of stoic biopic seem a lot more entertaining and fun, and Godzilla takes what's supposed to be like an empty monster movie and makes it sort of deep and moving and meaningful.
PT, I think you just brought us into the rhetorical situation.
Let's do it.
So all 4 of our regular co-hosts are writing professors. We like to have this section of the episode dedicated to making connections to our experience as scholars and teachers. The big one that jumps out at me is, because PT was just talking about it, is genre. So what do we feel like? Because I feel like our takes on the movie have been like it is transcending or exceeding its genre of the monster movie in some ways. But I want to kind of flip that around and ask you both, what do you feel like the monster movie genre allows this movie to do with World War II history that a movie that is not a monster movie would not be able to do? Or just any thoughts on genre and as it relates to this movie?
I think PT and I both reacted like, oh crap, that question got very hard. So I will try to back into it from the easier or just thoughts about genre. I think it is a really interesting moment in across filmmaking about how we have so many genres that are getting in. I think of Get Out as the movie that kind of started this trend, and then that kind of seeded elevated horror, quote unquote. I know I had a student who absolutely hated that term, so I like am worried she's going to jump out and hit me with a stick or something like, because I do think it can be problematic to people who have always loved horror. But there is this moment where I feel like we reached a saturation of genre where we were just all getting all the candy and we got sick to our little tummies on the candy. So now we're getting a little medicine mixed in a really wonderful way, right? And it's like, I think a film like Get Out is a triumph because it tells you, it gets you thinking about questions and gets you asking good ideas, grappling with good ideas despite that. So I do think that Godzilla Minus One is really participating in that, and that is I mean it fits in with our Monkey Man conversation from April, right? It's like that was the action movie trying to get elevated. So I do think that I see it as really working in that direction. Like, okay, everybody's seen Godzilla. What if we try to give them something really thoughtful to grapple with Godzilla? But the hard part of your question was actually the inverse of that. And so I think the cop-out answer is like, what do you get by putting Godzilla in your thoughtful World War II legacy Japanese character drama? Is you get people to see it. You get butts in the seats, right? Which I mean, it sounds cynical, but like if you had this exact movie without Godzilla and you were like, it's the story of a soldier who failed his kamikaze mission, people would not show. I mean, we three weirdos would be there because it would probably be nominated for foreign language film, but like your average moviegoer wouldn't show up. Just to complete my complete nonsense rant, I will say it always makes me think way back to Chasing Amy, which was Kevin Smith trying to go a little serious in his View Askew verse, which we should do a 10-episode series on because they definitely have aged well. Thumbs down. But I will say one of the things he said that I liked, he's like, look, I make stoner comedies. I'm going to get a bunch of stoners showing up in my movie theater. Why not talk to them about something with some kind of meaning, right? Like something with some kind of substance. And I don't think the monster movie genre has people expecting anything kind of smart in it, but they'll show up for that. PT, I think I've vamped enough. Here's your very thoughtful answer because you definitely figured it out.
Well, no, I spent all that time thinking about an elevated horror movie that's about a serial killer who's killing everyone who talks about elevated horror, and just goes from like place to place. And it's got layers. It's got
We
layers.
don't have a pitch segment on this show, but maybe we should.
I mean, not yet. Yeah, I mean, the thing that the genre question has me thinking about is, and it's unfortunate how often my thoughts turn to chuds who have bad opinions online, but it's the people who are like, oh, I don't need your politics in my science fiction. And it's just like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, that's what science fiction is for. Like, it's all there in order to explore realities of the world, but to put it in a heightened or elevated place or situation, so it can really be discussed and kind of dug into. So it seems weird to praise a Godzilla movie for being like, but you're wrestling with, this one's different because it's wrestling with the fallout of the war, both literal and psychological. When like that's what Godzilla is. Like the original Godzilla movie is doing that. So it's interesting that it's in a way sort of a full circle going back to it, because it's spun out into just like wacky fun monster times, and actually Godzilla's here to protect us, and that's when other monsters show up. Godzilla will appear to protect the good people of Tokyo from these other monsters, where it's like, no, it's just this big force that like you couldn't stop, that was existing outside of your control. And how do you respond to that, or how do you just cope with that reality? So in a way, it's sort of a back to basics of the genre, but because the genre has been so sort of twisted and corrupted, and we can get into the Americanization of it a little bit more as well. It just sort of reinforces how, like, why that was so successful and why that movie, latched onto people's imagination, not just in Japan, but around the world. I'm talking about the original Godzilla. I think it might have been nominated for best foreign film. I'll go look that up. But like it had like it got a lot of prominence at the time, and they filmed extra scenes in America with Raymond Burr, aka Perry Mason, or Ironside, if that's your preferred nighttime show, like Nick at Night type show. But there's something there, and I think the going back into that in a way after all of the effects things, in a way going back after all of it, in a way makes it feel more impactful when you strip it back down to just like, oh right, this is what this can be about, or this is what originally was about, and it still can be. I don't know, Jen, what do you think?
Trying to synthesize both of your comments, I would say that a lot of discussion of genre filmmaking, right? So monster movie, horror movie, sci-fi gets wrapped up in a sort of highbrow, lowbrow discourse, right? Of like, well, by definition, those genres are empty and hollow and either just for fun or mindless or something like that. And then real cinema is this other thing that doesn't use genre. But I would say that to pick up on sort of what PT was starting to say, I feel like if we think about this movie as an example of how that dichotomy is false, right? Because I think it's because the movie is using the monster movie genre as a way to displace and project the discussion and make it more accessible of the wartime trauma, right? Because it's like what we can because it both echoes and mirrors, right? Because we see the war story and we see what all these characters are going through, but then we can kind of visualize it through the very visceral horror of there is a giant lizard destroying our city, right? There's a giant lizard who could step on us at any moment, and life is precious, and everyone's gonna die, and like, you know what I mean? Like all of these really complicated, difficult emotions and psychology can kind of get laser beamed onto this big chunky lizard, and in a way that makes it a lot easier to address those issues and dig into them in a way that for moviegoers is not just more palatable, as Greg was saying, to get butts in the seats, right? Because people want to see big monsters, but in a way that actually emotionally makes it easier to digest. And so it's sort of like this is what science fiction is for. I feel like this is what monster movies is for. To go back to the Jaws discussion, I feel like a pretty standard academic argument that gets made about Jaws now, right, is that it's like a prime example of it's not about the monster itself, it's about the anxiety and the fear that the monster represents. And that it's constantly chasing us and lurking and it's a way for us, for viewers, to sort of work out their fear and anxiety, what they're afraid of culturally and socially, right, onto this very literal thing. And so I feel like that seems to be really what's happening here. To bring it back to Miyazaki, because I always want to do that, right? Like I almost made a "how do you live" joke earlier when Greg was talking about like how do you continue to live, and I was like, yeah, just like the title of the book that Miyazaki used. But I do feel like that covers that, that thinking about that, contemplating that, does become easier when you put it in the context of genre tropes, right? And that's I feel like that's what, in The Boy and the Heron, that's what Miyazaki is also doing. He's using fantasy and surrealism to sort of deal with these very raw emotions about loss and grief due to war, right?
The monster from the movie Jaws that's always lurking, potentially Richard Dreyfuss if you invite him to a screening. Mm-hmm. So just, be careful. Be careful out there, folks. Folks booking rep theaters. You never know when he may arrive. I do want to note one thing that is probably worth discussing. I wish I could speak on it more, but I have not seen this. It's easy to sort of like in the discussion sort of say, oh, finally, we went back to making a good Godzilla movie. There was another Godzilla movie from, I believe, 2016 that was from the Japanese production company called Shin Godzilla, which was a huge deal at the time. It won 7 Japan Academy Prize awards, which I'm assuming are like the Japanese versions of the Academy Awards. It was Picture of the Year. It got Director of the Year. And at least the brief description of it is that it's about like Godzilla shows up and the government having to deal with the red tape of how they're going to respond to it. And so like what the bureaucracy does to stop them from actually like productively doing something. So again, a social commentary about, I think, more present day Japanese government, but a standalone movie using the monster to kind of comment on society. And that one got a ton of praise. I always meant to watch it. And then Godzilla Minus One came out. People were like, oh, this one's even better. Or some people are like, Shin Godzilla is still a little bit better. Blah. But so, in a way, it's just when the Japanese companies, I think it's still, is it still Toho? Yeah, it's still Toho produced that one as well as Godzilla Minus One. They're really messing around with it from the perspective of how can this do what we've been saying, do what these genre films can do, which is comment on what monsters may represent and what it says about humans and humanity and our societies, as opposed to the American monsterverse, which is things blow up real good. And what if there's a whole other world underneath the crust of the earth? Like we don't know. But we can get one or two think pieces about how it could happen.
And then a world further below that world, if you see the new one. I'm going to spoil that piece of garbage without warning, just because.
Are you saying we have to go deeper? We have to go one deeper?
Once more into the breach. Yeah. Well, and that the only other kind of rhetorical situation context I want to bring up is just this is going to become a recurring section, because I think I had a similar rant about something else recently, which is like, get giant corporations out of movie making. And I understand like that is not going to happen, and they've always been there. But the fact that this really brilliant, wonderful piece of work had to get shoved aside so that the American company that holds the rights to Godzilla could get their Godzilla movie out. It's just so stupid. And actually, this I'll sharpen a Star Wars knife for a moment, which is this goes back to when Rogue One was coming out and they couldn't market it until Mission Impossible Rogue Nation had left theaters because the studios have a kind of gentleman's agreement and like those titles were too close. Like, first of all, trust audiences. We can figure this out, right? We figure out where in the MCU timeline it is based on like one shot of an Infinity Stone. We can figure out if you say this is a Godzilla movie that is not connected to this, we can watch both of those and have a good time. But I certainly am not going to claim any knowledge of how the corporate rights ended up here in America with this Legendary and other company to produce them here. But they're doing such dreck that is so successful. It makes me so angry that they're getting rewarded in some ways more than this film. Now, certainly this film has broken through and found its own critical success in a way. But like the fact that was even a part of how this movie was experienced by so many people. I'm in a Reddit group for watching all the movies for the Oscars before the Oscar ceremony. You would not believe how heated it got, because a lot of people are committed to actually like seeing these films and not pirating them because they really want to. And I was lucky to have seen this in theaters, and they were losing their minds. They're like, just let me see the movie, right? Is it Jonah Hill from 40-Year-Old Virgin? Like, I want to buy this. Like, let me buy this. And it's like endlessly these people who like have such goodwill and want to see a film. Same was true for Robot Dreams, which I think is getting its theatrical release next week somehow, which is just absurd as well. But so that's my rant about like, hey, the film industry is not so hot right now. So maybe we should just get all these stupid rules out of the way and let these films come out and people will see them and you'll still be fine, right? But unfortunately, Kong x Godzilla is one of the better performers of a very lackluster spring. So expect 18 more layers of Hollow Earth.
Yikes.
My main complaint about the Monsterverse is we really just focus on two monsters. It's like I was promised monsters, but like all I'm getting is Godzilla and Kong, and then a couple variations of Kong in these movies. It's like let's open it up. Let's do some more. You're gonna like that'll get me in. If I already saw Godzilla and Kong,
you want your Mothma content? Like, is that what we're
hearing? I mean, now I will say Godzilla King of Monsters, which I low key did like, which was the sequel to the Gareth Edwards Godzilla, which is not a good movie, but that did have Mothra, that did have Ghidorah. Those monsters did show up briefly. I believe they fought around Fenway Park.
I was gonna say, and Boston. That's the key thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Which maybe is part of the reason why I liked it. But was it Vera Farmiga in that movie? It was someone who was like working really hard to be like, I passionately care about these monsters, but was like, a very thankless role, because unlike this great movie, Godzilla Minus One, that movie, the humans were just only there to die. They were only there to get stomped. But yeah, either way, I want more monsters. But I also, like Greg is saying, I want better movies like this one, and I want people to be able to access this, because that was the problem when we kept telling Jen this movie is really good, and she's like, yeah, but I got to wait and see Oscar movies. Then it became an Oscar movie, and there was no way to see it. It was just off in the weeds, waiting for the contractual period of darkness to end so it could reemerge. And again, weirdly, luckily, it seemed like it didn't hurt the movie that it was just kind of dumped on Netflix with again, very little warning beyond like maybe like 6 hours before midnight. It might be on Netflix in America too. And then suddenly it was there. That got people to just go and watch it. But that's, it's crazy. It's crazy that like they couldn't capitalize on the hype of the recognition they got from the Academy.
Now I sort of wish that Netflix had just posted the picture of the dead fish floating in the ocean, and then that's it. And then people would be like, it's coming! Godzilla is coming! I also just want to say, I just realized earlier I said Mothma instead of Mothra.
Yeah, that's okay.
I have Star Wars in the brain, apparently. So just wanted to say that I acknowledge that I said that wrong.
Many Bothans died underneath the boot of Godzilla.
And/or season 2 spoilers. Mothma crushes a city.
All right. I think PT's brought us to Oscars watch. So like, this is mostly just going to be like a yay, because it already happened. But So, as we've alluded to already a couple times, so Godzilla Minus One got a visual effects nomination, and I remember in my Oscar punditry from earlier in the year that it was a lot of debate back and forth of like, can it do it? Right? Are people seeing this movie? Enough people seeing this movie? Does it have enough passion behind it? Can it kind of rise above its obscurity? Right? And actually win over some bigger sort of tentpole movies, and happy to report it did. Sometimes I'm happy to be wrong. Not often, but sometimes I'm happy to be wrong in my Oscar predictions, and this was one of those cases. But my question to both of you is like, would you have given it anything else? Had it had a better campaign from the start or whatever? You know what I mean? Like, could it have been in contention for any other categories?
I mean, in reality or in my wildest dreams?
Either one, yeah.
In reality, I would say, I'm trying to look now. I feel like sound is like something that like is necessary for this movie to work. That feels like maybe it could have gone in there. I mean, our old kicking target maestro is in there in sound. Like, could it have replaced that? I mean, I would like that, but I don't think it ever would have really happened. I will say that on my ballot for our awards, the letters, I did give Ryunosuke Kamiki the best actor nomination. I don't know if I would have, I would certainly not have expected that to have happened in the actual ceremony. I don't know what campaign would have had to have happened for that for him to break into that group. But yeah, I mean, I think that's just he gives an incredible performance, and a lot of what we keep saying about the humanity of this movie and the sort of the story resonating and connecting with us is because of that central performance. So yeah, I would have targeted that.
He really is great, and he does such a good job of occupying both the sort of PTSD, and he's like clearly not okay, but then also is really trying hard and loves his adopted family, and you know what I mean, is like a good person, right? Like I feel like his performance balances those dualities really well.
I'll say I'm looking that like there's no space for it in the actual roster this year, but the usual location for movies like this would be screenplay. As we look at, we've been doing our Oscar Ferry flashbacks. That is sort of the time of like, this is a weird movie that people like. Like, well, maybe it could go into the screenplay because there's 10 slots instead of just 5. So could this have gone in? It probably would have, I think, had to have gone into adapted because the Godzilla character exists. And that was already stacked. That already had a couple of movies that couldn't make it in that we were complaining about. So I don't think it could have been there, but that's another spot. And Greg, I'm sorry if that's what you were going to say. And
I was going to say, get out of here, Vim Vendors. You're not Japanese. So I would just give it the Japan choice for best international feature. Perfect Days, is that the title of his?
Yes.
Yeah. That was a good movie. I'm not really like trashing it, but it also was like, it didn't to me speak to my favorite international features, kind of help you learn about that country and their culture and their viewpoint. And this was, for me personally, such an insight into Japan post-war in a way I'd never seen before, that I really wanted that there. Modern day public toilets and the men who clean them also stirring stuff, but doesn't really speak to me in the same way. So I would give it that spot. And then I was like, and I would let it win. And then I was like, oh, right, zone of interest. Sorry, can't give away the award, but can give the spot for the nomination.
Well, and if we're changing Japan's submission, it's like, well, wait, would it go to The Boy and the Heron instead? But then it's like, well, that one animated, so that
yeah.
Spread love. I do need to issue a correction. The original Godzilla movie was nowhere near any Academy Award. I don't know why I thought that.
You were just hoping.
I had, that was a different kind of hope casting, and looking at the accolades section on Wikipedia to double check that. Also, right adjacent to it is Roger Ebert's retrospective, like from the 90s. 1.5-star review of how this is just a bad movie. Like, congratulations on its legacy, but this is really bad. So not everyone
All right.
loved the original.
Well,
Jen,
okay,
do you have any other Oscar?
none other than what we've already said. I probably would have gone screenplay, international feature.
Score? How do we feel about the
there's
score?
no way. Oh yeah, the score is really good.
Score good.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Sorry.
Production design, maybe. I don't
Hmm.
know. Yeah, because it's like the boats. I feel like the boats count as production design, right? They're really good.
I'm just looking like, is there any category that Napoleon is in? Like
we
that
just
this
boot it
movie
out,
could
yeah.
replace it?
Give him a-
Like costume design, sure, why not? Like 40s.
I would really, there's no way to fit this into any sort of Oscar framework, but I would really want some way for all the actors, the other boat guys to get acknowledged. I love them. They were so fun.
The scientist would be my supporting actor potential.
Yeah, the scientist, and then even the kid, and we didn't even talk about this, but like adding, there's so many layers, right? Because the kid who didn't get to fight in the war and now he feels guilty that he didn't get to help, and like then he could, like his storyline is great, and he's a super minor character.
Right. Well, he's the one who has the Dunkirk moment when it's just suddenly we're all here and all the tugboats show up, which is great.
All right, we did it. We didn't get the bends. We went down to the depths and came back with our floaties intact. Greg, we can say that now. We're in spoiler mode. Greg, where can folks find your work? I know there's a lot going on in the Star Wars world these days.
Yes, I am doing weekly review shows on the Rebel Base Card feed for the Acolyte, the new Star Wars High Republic show, and our first response featured Jen as a guest, and I'm hoping we get PT on before the end of the season. Saying that as the person who does not make the calls but can just be like, hey, remember how good PT was? Like he's free. So, and while I'm making plugs, instead of plugging my letterbox, which is Ion Cannon, I will instead say people should go read Jen's review of those 2 episodes of The Acolyte because it's excellent and it's filled with good cinematic goodness.
Aww.
So I'm stealing Jen's plug to say go read her review of The Acolyte and check out that show. That show is some have said it's the Godzilla -1 of Star Wars Disney Plus shows. So,
oh, thanks for the plug, Greg. Yeah, now I'm like, when can we do an episode on Kill Bill and Frozen? Maybe that's how we get our Acolyte content.
I was going to say, do you mean the episode of The Acolyte that we keep postponing off the schedule?
And PT, where can folks follow the show?
Well, once again, they can follow us at your Substack, thelongtake.substack.com. A great place to receive notifications about new episodes of the podcast, as well as those. I will co-sign Greg's thing. Jen's excellent written reviews of things such as new episodes of The Acolyte. But you can also get us wherever you get your podcast. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, YouTube. We're on all these places. Find us wherever you're listening right now. Hit subscribe. Why don't you leave us a rating and a review as well? That would be lovely. 5-star reviews help us get a little more notice on the old algorithm. You can also look for us on social media at The Long Take Review, which is on Instagram and Threads, or on Letterboxd at LTR Pod. And Jen, where can folks find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Threads at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, and on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen. I'm going through a Paul King rewatch marathon.
Nice.
We started with Wonka. Now we did Paddington, and now apparently you can't stream Paddington 2 anymore anywhere.
Ooh.
So I might have to purchase Paddington 2, which is a great movie. So I'm not going to mind that. Yeah. But this is a sidebar. I know we were so close to only doing this episode in an hour, and now we're blowing it. But we watched Wonka, and then one of my kids, when we were watching Paddington, was like, "Why is Willy Wonka's mom in this movie. Where's Willy Wonka? And I was like, oh, how do I explain this to you? It was so cute.
That screams show him Shape of Water next. All right.
Oh gosh.
Why is Wonka's mom kissing the fish?
The Shape of Water, Blue Jasmine double feature comes up after Paddington 2.
But clearly she had an impact because she's not actually in very much of Wonka. And I'm going to stop my Wonka takes. All right. Thank you both. This war is now over. Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.